Hello, everyone. Welcome to this episode. If you see me for the first time, my name is Dr. Godwin. I am a sustainable development advisor advising different governments in different countries on sustainable development policies. So today I'm looking at coups in West Africa. Sadly, I hate to say, and I don't mean to sound alarmist or I'm not in support of disruption of democratic processes or democratic regime in countries. But sadly, coups in Africa will continue. And if care is not taken, it's going to spread into countries like Nigeria and other countries within the West African region. The data is clear. The youth in many of these countries are disillusioned. Many people are yearning for a different option. Many countries in West Africa have practiced democracy for over 20-something years without interruption. But the lives of many Africans have not improved over the years. It has actually deteriorated. You can take countries like Nigeria as a case study too and see in the past 25 years, how have the life of Nigerians improved? Have security improved? Have the poverty index improved? And the answer is clearly no. Poverty in Nigeria is alarming. Nigeria has become the poverty capital of the world, basically, ahead of India that used to occupy that position. Security is almost non-existent. The basic social services are non-existent. So these are the factors that give rise to military takeovers. And not because military rule is better. In fact, the military establishment is responsible for the destruction of countries within the West African region, and I can say that for Nigeria. So the alternative clearly is not military takeovers for the sake of military takeovers. But the fundamental factors that give rise to these coups is not being addressed by these governments within Africa. And that's why these military coups may continue if things continue the way they are going in West Africa. Take these countries, for example. If you look at the corruption index, the Transparency International Corruption Index, countries like Nigeria, Kenya, Egypt consistently rank poorly on this index. In fact, according to this UN article, $88 billion every year through illicit flows leave Africa. These are funds that are meant for the development of these various countries, but they leave Africa. So corruption has to be addressed. But I'll get into some of the solutions that need to be applied in West Africa to stem the tide of military takeovers in Africa. Now, one other major contributing factor is weak institutions and governance structures. Weak institutions make weak policies. Poor policy implementation and compromised judicial systems also undermine stability. Weak institutions. In many countries, take Nigeria for example, the judicial system is nothing to write home about. And once you have a weak judicial system in African countries, the perception of investors will be completely negative. So there's a direct correlation between the strength of the judicial system in the country and the investor confidence. Because I'll be afraid to put my investment in a country where I know that if something goes wrong, I'm not going to be able to get a sound judgment. Because most of these judges, unfortunately, in a lot of African countries, are as corrupt as the politicians. So weak institutions need to be strengthened. Another issue for a lot of youths, what a lot of youths are yearning, we live in an AI age, we live in social media age. Many African youths see their counterparts in other jurisdictions with different things that they could otherwise have if resources are utilized judiciously to improve or better their lots. Unfortunately, many African countries, the politicians, loot funds that are meant for social services and fritter them abroad. And the youth of these countries see these things happening. And that's why there's a yearning for change. But it doesn't necessarily mean that a change from these democratic regimes to military regime is good change. But the fundamental factors that actually give rise to this military coups, again, must be addressed. Many people have no access to quality education, no access to basic services. Millions struggle with inadequate healthcare, unreliable access to clean water and sanitation, widespread poverty, and limited social support systems. That's what's obtainable in many of these African countries. So what must Africa do to move forward? What should African governments do to move forward? Number one is to implement severe zero-tolerance anti-corruption measures. So for us to get things right, we have to adopt the model of China. Africa must adopt a no-nonsense approach to corruption, similar in intensity to China's anti-corruption campaign. This is something that has to be devoid of politics. Create anti-corruption commissions that have real prosecutorial powers. Enforce harsh penalties for bribery, embezzlement, and contract fraud, especially for senior officials. Protect whistleblowers with strong legal frameworks. China's campaign disciplined millions of officials. Africa needs similar decisive signal that corruption will no longer be tolerated. In some cases, we hear of how some Chinese officials were even sentenced to death. So that's how serious to take it. Especially in countries now that are coming up with different tax regimes and tax systems, Kenya, Nigeria, and all that. Africa doesn't have a revenue problem. Africa has a corruption problem. Nigeria has a corruption problem, for example. And until we deal with corruption at the level of treason, at the level with ultimate penalty, things will not change. Africa goes nowhere. And these are the fundamental factors that lead to coups in Africa. Corruption has to be dealt with. And we must look at the model of China. The other way that we can reduce corruption is to digitize government processes to reduce human interference. The e-procurement systems, digital tax collection, automated public service delivery. We live in the age of AI, age of technology. A lot of things that are done, with humans being intermediaries are prone to corruption. So the only way we can move away from that is by digitizing government services. Strengthen judicial independence. The judicial system in Africa has to be independent. Otherwise, we go nowhere. We have to ensure merit-based appointments of judges. We have to create oversight bodies that discipline corrupt judicial officials. We have to give courts full autonomy. Even when rulings go political elites, an honest justice system is the backbone of investment and governance. Without independent judicial system in Africa, countries go nowhere. There has to be independent judicial system. The other thing is public sector reform and hiring and promotions. One certain time I returned to Nigeria to one of the ministries. I will not say the ministry. I went there. A lady who was attending to me was expecting me to pay some bribe. And when I wasn't getting the signal, this lady left me and went home. So somebody who was waiting for me, who see me, and then, I had to tell the person what I was experiencing. So the person came and went to see the director of that lady who was supposed to offer me the service, had to call her, and she said she was already at home. So this is the kind of public service we have in a lot of African countries. So number one, jobs must no longer be distributed based on ethnicity, loyalty, or patronage. Africa needs transparent recruitment system. We need performance-based promotion systems. We need regular audits of civil service payrolls to eliminate ghost workers. This is what needs to be done. We need to professionalize our civil service. In the countries where I've had the privilege of advising governments and even working in some of those public sectors, top professionals with doctorate degrees, with master's degrees, are the kind of talents that are attracted to the public service in countries that I've had the privilege to be. In Africa, it's completely different. You go to the ministries, you see outdated things, just using the civil service to waste time, eating it reckless and casual and completely aloof of what is happening around the world. We need top researchers, public sector research, policy researchers in the public sector in African governments. So we need reform of the public sector. So there's so many other things that I would like to touch on, but because of time, I don't want to make this video too long. So if you find this video helpful, please don't forget to subscribe, smash the like button. Let's talk about how Africa can come out of the mess it is in and move forward. We live in the 21st century. We live in 2025. Things have to be done differently. Look at the counterparts. Singapore, in Malaysia, Indonesia, the Asian counterparts. They're doing great. They were at the same level as countries like Nigeria, Kenya, and a lot of African countries. But today, these countries have far surpassed African countries. Africa must rise. But it is a collective effort. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next video. Bye-bye now.